It's been 6 years, and it's time for a change, and an important announcement. I put out the first Midwinter Minis video 6 years ago, almost to the day, speed painting sandstone Necrons. It's a classic, but there's one piece of advice I give in that video that years later, I just can't really stand by anymore. I used to recommend priming your miniatures with cheap car primer. It was less than half the price of proper hobby brands like Citadel or Army Painter. It was cheap and cheerful, and it did the job. Well, it's not 2018 anymore, and since then, Halford's primers have doubled in price. I'm a frugal hobbyist at heart, and unfortunately I just can't really recommend this stuff anymore. And I've made a switch to the Colourforge. Now, that's obviously not the exciting announcement. I've spoken about the switch to the Colourforge in a few previous videos, but I've made over 260 videos on this channel so far, and I'm not so vain that I expect you to have watched all of them. The announcement is, for the first time in this channel's history, a hobby brand has worked with me to create a bespoke product. This is Midwinter Ice, a brand new model primer from the Colourforge, and part of their signature series featuring some of my favourite wargaming content creators. It's a difficult colour to describe in arty terms, kind of a vibrant aquamarine blue, a blue leaning cyan maybe, but goodness me, it's gorgeous. In terms of application, treat it like any other spray primer. Shake the absolute f*** out of it for a good few minutes before you use it to make sure all of the cool pigments inside mix well with the propellant, and then you want to do a nice light first pass. I find staying about 8 inches, 20 centimeters away gives you the best results. Give it a few minutes to touch dry, and then give it another light pass. This should give really good coverage without clogging up the details. I've been having loads of fun with this too. Let me show you some of the tests I've made so far. I've played around with using different bluey, greeny contrast and speed paints to see what effects they have on Midwinter Ice. My favourites have to be Caribbean Ocean from the Army Painter. It complements the hue really nicely, but also Citadel's Space Wolves Grey shades it really well too. I also tested out some of my blue-green paints, and the closest ones I found are Citadel's Baharoth Blue, which is pretty bang on to be honest, but slightly more satin. TT Combat's Reef Rager Teal, which is just a teensy weensy bit lighter, and P3 Arcane Blue, which is just a shade more green. So being real here, even if you don't buy Midwinter Ice, you can hopefully still use these next demos by using one of these 3 paints as a base coat. Anyway, let's paint a Space Marine and see what kind of look the primer can really give. First up, we'll create a unique shade by mixing my 2 favourites of the test, Caribbean Ocean and Space Wolves Grey, and add a little bit of airbrush flow improver too. This will help these shades seek out the cracks and crevices more and stain the surfaces a bit less. And I'll also just add a tiny bit of water to make it a bit thinner. I want the shade to be pretty subtle. Slop it on all over this bad boy with a big brush, and then when it's dry, I'll give the whole model a soft, gentle dry brush with Baharoth Blue, which, as I said, was the closest match to the spray. In terms of perfect colours for highlighting, if you prefer Citadel paints, Ulthuan Grey is a great choice, but AK Interactive had this snow blue paint, which is literally perfect. A bit of rough and ready edge highlighting on the armour panels, and a final tidy up with Baharoth Blue. And yeah, that'll give you a rough idea of what armoured models look like using Midwinter Ice as a primer, and how quick and easy it is to achieve this and build up an intense, bold colour. What armies would you use this for? I bet it would be great to quickly paint up some 90s style Space Wolves. Now speaking of retro Warhammer, remember that colourful old Necromunda terrain? I bloody love that, and I reckon Midwinter Ice would do a great job of bringing the look of the classic cardboard terrain onto plastic or MDF kits. Obviously start off with a priming coat of Midwinter Ice, and then a big old coat of that shade I mixed up, Caribbean Ocean and Space Wolves Grey, a bit of airbrush flow improver and water, and wait until that's fully dry. Old Necromunda terrain basically had 3 elements: the blue painted metal, which we've kind of already sorted in just 2 steps. And now let's carefully paint on some hazard stripes. Only joking. I quickly knocked up some strips of weathered hazard stripes on the computer, printed them out, cut them to size, and stuck them down with PVA, and a little bit PVA on top to really make sure they're stuck on. I've added this printable page of hazard stripes to the Midwinter Minis Patreon page, by the way, just in case you fancy joining. A bit of sponged on Baharoth Blue all over everything, including the new hazard stripe, should make it nice and believable. And now for the third main section, and that is the silver elements. Just a quick silver base coat on a few of the select metal bits. If you want this to be quick and easy, don't go bonkers painting every single rivet. Just a few bits here and there. I'm just doing this on the little fuse box thing, this small vent, and the big vent in the middle. Think blocks of silver rather than silver details. Now, to give some of the edges a rougher look and add a bit more visual detail, a quick, sketchy and very random dry brush of the same silver. This will hopefully make some of the edges look like the paint has rubbed off to the bare metal, and also a tiny bit of silver here and there into any of the big areas of sponged on light blue bits, especially over the hazard stripes, to make them look like they've been chipped. Grab a black wash and add some really quick shading to any of the metal areas, and if you want your printed hazard stripes to be a bit bolder, sketch some onto the middle sections of the black, keeping your paint well clear of the edges to keep them nice and sharp. You could also reinforce that yellow too in the same way if you want, just use a thinner, more transparent paint like a contrast or speed paint, or even one of the old glaze paints. Now, if you like, you can also add a bit of corrosion. Some very thinned brown paint splooshed on and spread around into the corners, enhanced with a very thinned down orange paint lined into the grimiest bits. Yes, all my childhood dreams of having a huge table of vibrant Necromunda terrain are one step closer. Okay, example 3, and this one might blow your mind a bit. You know how Games Workshop give you 2 options of priming your models for contrast paints? Grey Seer for a neutral tone, and Wraithbone for a warmer tone. Well, let me introduce you to a third option. Midwinter Ice is a really smart way of providing a cool temperatured priming layer, which will tonally shift all of the contrast or speed paints you apply over the top to a cooler colour. Let me show you what I mean with this orc. Midwinter Ice all over, a quick dry brush of pure white all over just to bring out those details, leaving the cyan still visible in the recesses and towards the bottom of the model, and then I just painted it pretty normally. Gut Ripper Flesh on the skin, Flesh Tearers Red for the armour, Skeleton Horde for the vest, Rattling Grime on the trousers, Basilicanum Grey on the guns and the rubble, Bad Moon Yellow for the accent colour, and then a bit of overbrush silver on the metal parts. And that's it. Simple, quick, and a much cooler look than your standard contrast paint orc. By cooler, I mean color temperature wise, but I think it looks great too. It almost gives you a whole new color palette to work with mentally. All of your contrasts, speed paints, shade paints will all look slightly different over this. The last demo I want to show you is kind of a 2-in-1. It's just 2 really simple, really effective color transitions that Midwinter Ice makes incredibly simple to achieve. First off, on this Nighthaunt Ghoulie, I've obviously given it a Midwinter Ice base coat, and now I'm going to give it a gentle dry brush of white just to bring out that texture, and then I'm going to give it a top-down blast of Gauss Blaster Green using my airbrush. Now you could obviously dry brush this too if you wanted, but I think an airbrush really adds that ghoulish, ethereal look. When that's dry, we're going to fade that pale green through our lovely cyan into a rich mid-blue. Some of this tidal wave speed paint in the airbrush, and now aiming at the bottom of the rags instead. And honestly, it's as simple as that. So easy, but looks so nice. Just paint in the chains and the skin and you're done. Or just leave it like this for an extra ghostly look. The other awesome transition I love with this color is by using magenta. This one is going to be a bit darker, so I'm going to use that shade I pre-mixed earlier to darken down those recesses on this Gene Stealer, and then I'm going to give it a dry brush with white. I mean, this looks sick already, but now let's fire some of this Doomfire magenta through an airbrush at the top half of the model. Because it's transparent, it reacts with the cyan left in the recesses to make it extra rich. A little dry brush with a light pink paint like Vallejo Squid Pink on the magenta bits, and goodness me, that looks tasty. Pick out any details you want with toothy, horny, bony colours and call it a day. This primer would have obviously been super useful for painting the trim of my Warlord Titan too. I'm sure it would have been way faster to base coat the black panels than base coat light blue on all of the trim. Oh well, mistakes were made. Anyway, what other armies, terrain or effects do you think this paint colour would be really useful for? Let me know in the comments. If you like the look of any of these and are thinking, yeah, that looks pretty awesome actually, please go follow the link in the description and check out the Kickstarter campaign. And the other awesome paints from my favourite content creators too. Thank you so much for watching, happy hobbying, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.